All right. Hi guys. Thank you for taking out time Saturday. I'm sure you had a lot of plans to go out. So, but instead you chose to uh, join the session. I'll just before we actually dive deep into what product design is, I'll start by sharing a few designs that kind of really inspire me, and I really uh, like keep going back to them whenever I have to work on something new. Uh, this is one. By the way, on the right side, what you see is actually a strawberry shampoo, supposedly. I think you get the idea. So, before let's start by asking like where we are in terms of what's the basic understanding what people have around product design. So, if anybody would like to uh, start by sharing their thoughts as to what for them what product design means.
Yeah, product design can be UI design, architecture design, which best suits the user's requirement and the budget.
Okay.
For me, product design would be a systematic approach of taking into consideration the vision and how to achieve that vision. Uh, and then, yeah, basically that approach that what's my vision is, where I want to reach, and what are the various steps that I would take into consideration to achieve that.
All right. That's also close enough.
For me, a product design would be to create something that can be sold to the customers, create something as in a product.
Okay. Anyone else? Prakhar, Apurva?
Yep. So I think product design is a lot from the perspective of the end user, how easy it feels for them to using a product, how at home they feel while using a product, how natural, intuitive. So basically, designing it from the perspective of an end user, how comfortable they are with the product. So basically, a study or way of doing things is called
Yeah,
product.
that's good. That's almost right. That's also like a really close one. All right. So, what's common in all the answers that all of you have given is the basic premise is just one, which is a product has to solve a problem, and all the thought process, all the vision, strategy, analysis, testing goes about solving that one problem. So, I mean, this could be an existing problem. For example, with Swiggy, let's say fo- home delivery of food was very unorganized. What you had to have phone numbers of different restaurants, and you call them up, and there's not a lot of options, so you keep ordering the same thing every time because those restaurants are reliable. Or it could be a created problem. For example, with smartphones, like there wasn't like a demand per se, but you created a demand with when iPhones came in. They said that no, you need to use a touch screen. So at the end of the day, either there is a problem that people have recognized, users have recognized, and they've been asking for it, or you identify that problem yourself as an entrepreneur and solve a problem. So that's kind of how also service companies and product companies work. Service companies, somebody brings them a problem, they find a solution around it and give it to the client. With product companies, they research into it and find a problem and kind of solve it. So it has to be it. If you have to just summarize, it is about problem solving. Now, this is like I think Rahul mentioned about clients and about budget. Uh, so that's kind of a difference between how businesses think and how a designer thinks of a problem. So now, if you just see this image, the only thing that changes is understanding, which is it's written adaptive thing, but what is that? I mean, what's the difference between design thinking and business thinking? So it's like theoretically, it's like if you were to go by a definition, it's this what you see right now. It's a human-centric creative process to build meaningful and effective solutions for people. Like too much going on there. If we were to simplify it for to make it very clear for everyone, for a layman, for someone who uh, writes a program, or for someone who actually sees the analytics, or someone like with diverse roles, or someone who doesn't know how technology works, how do you explain it to them? It just boils down to one single aspect, which is empathy. Now, what do you understand by empathy? Anyone?
The user should be able to relate to.
Right? Any other understanding?
How closely are you trying to solve the problem that the user is really facing? So you empathize with the user and then hit that pain point there.
Right. Yeah. So, as both of you said, it's about basically getting into the shoes of the user. Instead of you being the seller and the user being the buyer, you become the user and then you solve the problem for yourself, rather than thinking of yourself as a different entity. You become the user. It's more like how in theater, when you have to play a different actor, you different character, you become that character. And that's all the good actors that we know are those where we are not able, we are, when we see an act a character, we forget. So it's simply about empathy. How closely have you become like one with the user when solving the problem? All right, so now there are a bunch of steps that are involved in the process of how designs are made. I mean, there are a lot of terms going around: user interface design, there is user experience design, there is architecture design, there is interaction design. So all these terms are can be overwhelming, but if you kind of understand the process and what we've already discussed, it just comes down to the same uh, pain point of understanding users' problems and solving it. So I mean, there are 7 points. I'll just like won't go really deep into it. So I'll just keep it conversational. If anyone wants to research more on any of these points, they have enough ammo to kind of get started. Uh, right. So vision and strategy. This was something that Deepti mentioned to start. How like how you address a problem or so again, just give an example of Uber, and this is like one of my favorite examples when it comes to product design. Uh, is there are answering two questions: what and why. So it's a simple one. Let me ask you, what does Uber do? If you have to just explain in one straightforward line. Anyone?
Allows you to book cabs to commute.
Right? Simple, straightforward. It's just an app-based taxi service. You had taxi services before, you still have taxi services. So why did we need Uber?
convenience of the phone.
Okay. Anyone else?
Because we wouldn't get a taxi when we needed it exactly at that time.
Okay, so reliability basically. Uh,
Economical.
it's cheap, yes.
Yeah.
I would like to hear from the women on the chat. Anything is about Uber
Yes.
that works for you
Safety.
as safety, right? So before the app-based taxis happened, you had there was public transport was erratic. Uh, they were expensive, they were not reliable, and they were not safe. So how Uber, as far as the vision is concerned, this is the what and the why. Now the next step of this is the strategy. How do you go around it? So what Uber did as the first point, they cut the middlemen, as in the travel agencies, the operators who were kind of handling the operations, and they reached out directly to the drivers. So anyone can download the app and starts taking bookings for Uber. I mean, of course, they have the background checks and the security protocols, but it's the for them the user is both the rider and the driver. So they have a separate application for both of them. Now it's transparent as to you know who the driver is, you know the name, you know the age, and you are trusting the application to have done some background verification of that driver, so you feel safe. Then ETA and GPS tracking is something that you know, okay, in 3 minutes the ride's gonna be there, and it's mostly accurate. Another point which I didn't add here was, of course, the cost. I mean, now that it's going up, but when Uber and Ola had launched, like the prices were really cheap. I mean, it was. I remember it was one third of what the other radio taxis were offering at that point of time. So this is the difference between a vision, like what are you trying to solve, and the strategy around it. Going to the second point, which is what you are setting out to do, but how, like, what's the next step about it? Like, and that's where research comes in. Now, there are three ways that high level ways to kind of go about research steps. Uh, One is interviews, like you do in-person interviews, and in research circles, in-person interviews are obviously more advisable than a remote or a phone conversation, because when you are sitting with someone, it's not just how what they say, it's mostly how they react to something. You see how their facial expressions change when it comes to a product, how their body language changes around it. So you kind of get a sense of how they are reacting to the idea. I mean, a lot of times when I personally show someone a product, it's not whether they like it or not. It's more are they reacting to it. And you, instead of just listening, you have to keep your eyes open and see how they react to it. You have to put it out to 1,000 users and check it. So there are like tools available to do online surveys, like there's SurveyMonkey, one the most popular one. You can just put a set of questions, and the user, and then based on that you write an analysis. Uh, you have to keep it short, like you can't overwhelm it with a lot of questions, because otherwise it won't be as accurate as it would have been. And it has to be very direct. It can't be subjective, because people would not write paragraph you. I mean, MCQs are still like something that people can still do it, unless of course someone is paying you for it. So all these market research companies, they hire people to take these surveys and answer to them. So that's where you have an option to kind of go all out. But if it's just your friends who are like helping you out with it, it's better to keep it short and direct. With market research, I mean, there's like just these three steps. You can go, like you can have a separate session on them. Like market research is something where people basically analyze their competitors, the prices, the demand, elasticity of that, how to position your product. So all of these things go in that. I mean, I won't go really into the economics of that, but from a designer perspective, all you need to do is understand what the user wants. And coming back to the point where we started, which is the empathy. So everything is tied back to that. Any questions so far before we go ahead?
No.
All right. You can just like pause me if you have any questions even in between. I'll just stop there. All right, coming to the third point, which is analysis. Again, user analysis. This is like one of my favorite step in the process. Uh, so this is like a step wherein we create personas for users. What this is basically is where we create a fictional character. Let's say I'm selling a streaming service to the user. So I identify, okay, let's say my user is a 21-year-old, uh, 21-year-old girl who likes to browse online, or it could be a 35-year-old man who's goes to office, comes back, has just 1 hour to stream, or it could be a 50-year-old woman who's at home the entire day and needs something during the afternoon. So these are the different ways in which you create different fictional characters, and then go really deep into their behavior. As to, if you can see in this image, this is a fictional character. This does not exist, but they've given him an occupation, a location, the archetype. What are his motivations? What doesn't work for him in the frustration section? Then personality, technology. So these are the different parameters around which you actually uh, create these personas. Now, once you have them, that's when once you create your strategy, you can keep coming back to these personas and validate it whether this what I'm building is working for this particular persona or not. And then you can identify whether your product is a massy product or it's a very niche product, so that when you go ahead and you go start your marketing campaigns, so you target only a selected user for that. Or if you have a different variety of products, then every product has to have a targeted marketing strategy around it. So for example, coming back to streaming service, what a 21-year-old wants would not be same as what a 50-year-old woman wants. So both of them will have different suggestions coming in for when they log into the streaming service. So for example, even on Netflix, what you see is mostly tied around your behavior. It's not something which is generic, which is thrown to every user. So this is how they come up to that. Of course, there's a lot of data science that goes into it, but on a product design level, that's how they identify these aspects. Another way of going about how do you identify yourself with the user is creating an empathy map. So it has 4 columns. Like you have what the person says, thinks, does, and feels. Now, and this is an exercise that like you basically do for an entire day with the team, and then you start adding, okay, what does uh, the user want? For example, in this case, they're buying a TV. So what they think, they a lot of users might not say exactly what they feel. So it's very different to differentiate between the both and to kind of relate. Okay, if someone is saying that I was expecting something different, what does it actually mean, and how would they react to it? So this is a very like helpful exercise that every product design team always goes through these series of steps, like first creating personas and to identify their user. And this always helps to keep validating your end result, as to keep coming back to this and say, okay, I have all my check boxes are ticked. All right, moving on to the next one, which is ideation. This is something that I think most of us would be really familiar with, and this is something that we've already been doing in software companies. Is the base the ideation. So you must have seen user journey maps and user flows. This is where you kind of divide the entire experience into different steps, and you kind of detail them out in terms of design, or basically this is like really small, but what it actually does is, for example, in decision to use, the first step, they've written down how at what are the pain points of this step, and also how can a person not proceed and leave at this step. So your goal as a product is to make sure your user completes the entire journey. If it's breaking at any point, that's a pain point, and that's something that you need to address and like tweak your design around it. This is something like all the QAs are like quite aware of, and it's their favorite uh, is to create user stories. It's like it has to be very simple that like a child can understand, and it's not complicated. It has to be simple. Like as a persona is something we all discussed. I want to action is what the user does, so that you the outcome is happening. In case of Uber, it's booking a ride or a transaction, a successful transaction. For e-commerce, you're buying products, but when do they make money is when the transaction actually happens. So that's the outcome you're trying to achieve there. And again, based on your product, based on your users, uh, like how diverse your user base is, there'll be a dozens of user stories for catering to every different target audience. This is again something like uh, does not need much explanation. Is where you actually create a sitemap and you figure out the different steps, like how what are the different options that the user has, what are the different pages, what are the different offerings, and further deep down you go into different kind of pages. So this is pretty straightforward. Yeah, now that you have your architecture ready and you have a sense of what you are trying to do, is when you start with the visual steps of it, and that's where wireframing comes in. This is still like what you see is again a hand-drawn wireframe, wherein like a lot of designers still like to go back to paper and start sketching when they're actually building designs. I mean, of course, there are a lot of tools available now to do this digitally so that you can easily edit it, but it's just a personal choice that a lot of people would still want to stick to paper and just sketch it out. Now that you have something visual, you have something that you've let's say you're building it for someone else, you have something visual to actually go back and share it and get their thoughts on. The design, actual design that all of us understand and what comes to our mind is like which starts at this step. Uh, like a few years back when these prototyping tools were not available, everything was created on a static screen. Like you had like I remember designers actually building a small illustrator, which was typically like a graphic designer software. Things have changed a lot. Now you can create interactive prototypes, which basically has all the animations, interactions. You can like have a complete journey can be shown just without actually a single line of code going into it. The entire design can be built on XD. This is one software. There's also Envision that is quite popular. I've personally used XD more, so like I just feel this is quite like a significant change that has been brought by the software in terms of the ease of creating prototypes. Is there a yeah? Yes, Prakar. Even I love it. All right. So I just suggest everyone to whenever they have some free time on and just play around with this tool. It's quite intuitive and you can just easily create. Even as coders, it's like quite something like you can easily create and you can easily communicate your thought process before you actually start implementing it. Unless you have a designer working with you. All right. Now this is where like a lot of team struggle is how do you actually communicate your design with someone who will go ahead and implement it. This is where your design specs come into play. It has to be very like again with both with InVision and XD. It can be very detailed out, like highly detailed. You can have specifications going down to the color, the font size, uh, what what is the line height, text spacings, etc. So you can easily, and also these tools give you an option to directly copy the CSS from there and just put it in your code. So that way also the delivery becomes faster. Like earlier, when you had to work on Photoshop or Illustrator, you had to manually see everything, match it to your design. And a lot of times, your things like line height and letter spacing uh, used to like go haywire because the coders would not understand how that worked. But now with these tools, you can easily pick up the parameters and you can easily put them into your code. I'm sure like this is something that all of us have been already been doing, so it's not uh, much to discuss here. Coming back to our process, your application is ready. It's like you're doing a limited controlled launch of it. So how do you validate your change thought process? This testing is not exactly the what we understand as testing as bug fixes, etc. And like the kind of testing we do as coders, from a design perspective, it's basically validating your thought that has gone into the product, which is mostly that you went out and you said you are solving a problem. But are you really, now that your application is in place, the goals that you set out to achieve, are you actually doing it or not? So there are two types of I mean, there are more, but from a high level, there are just two types of testing that a designer does. One is with their internal team. It's called dog fooding. It's basically eating your own dog food, which is basically testing your own product, using it instead of asking the users to do it. What happens here is you just show your team that this is how it's working, and then you gather feedback from them, which is the first step. And then you go out and test it with real users, which is basically you can create a smaller pool initially before you go live. Your loyal customers, you roll out a version for them, you discuss with them, you talk to them. uh, there's something called as guerrilla testing, wherein you just randomly approach people and ask them to give their feedbacks on the product. Also, I mean, if let's say there is something you want them to try for a week, then you ask them to kind of create logs for you over a period of week and see how they are reacting to it. People get paid to kind of give you the feedback like this. So that's basically validating all your thought process, all your ideas with actual people, real people. Okay. Now coming to the last bit of it. Your product is out there. It's not a movie that you just wait for users to watch, either like, dislike, comment on it, or like just diss it completely, and it's a failure. It's not like that when it comes to products. It's it's always changing. You can always come back, tweak it, have another version ready. So this step is the most important step. Is when it's out there, you have to constantly seek the responses and how people are actually reacting to it. So if there's anything which is not working, you can quickly pivot it and change it, and like minimize your losses there. Now there are these. This is a like a generic image of the different kinds of results. I mean, of course, all of us have used Google Analytics. We can see how the metrics actually work. You can see how much time people are spending on a particular page, what next step do they take, how are the funnels in place. You can also check what's the acquisition, where is the majority of your user base coming from, and what are the drop offs, what's the bounce rate, so things like these. There are other two, yeah, before that, these are the three different kinds of analysis that you can do. I'll just go pick them one by one. I've spoken about Google Analytics, but these two tools are something that like I really like. Like these are one of my favorite tool, Hotjar, to kind of get a sense of how the product is performing. And I'll just show you quickly how what actually it does. All right. So basically, you just inject, like you just put a small JavaScript code in your just like analytics in your code. You can put the snippet, and what it does, it just creates these heat maps for you, which basically tells you where the user is moving, where it's he or she is clicking the most. So these are click heat maps. Then you have move heat maps, wherein where the mouse is moving, so you know which button is like the most popular one. So in this case, people were clicking on the second navigation item a lot. Then they also have scroll heat maps as to how many people did actually scroll the entire page for you while browsing through your product. You can download these heat maps and you can just share it as well. These are the number, how many people are viewing it on desktop, mobile. This is another tool here. What it does is basically shows you the mouse movement on a particular page, how the user is moving on the actual page, what's the path of it. Then you can create your own funnels around it and see which is how much retention your product offers. And you can actually see these recordings and see why the drop off is happening. So I remember I was working on a product, and I like there were a lot of people coming on the page, filling half of the form, and but not moving ahead. So when and it was quite bizarre that why this was happening. And when we actually saw the recordings, we realized that the slider was giving an issue on a particular set of screen, on mobile screens on a particular OS. So I wasn't using it, so it slipped our eye. But from these recordings, we could gather that okay, the slider wasn't intuitive enough. So we changed it, and then the results completely changed. Uh, yeah, you can analyze different forms and different form fields, like where which step has the maximum drop off. Like For example, if let's say a lot of people are not comfortable in sharing their phone number, so you'll be able to see it. Okay, people stopped when they were asked for their phone numbers, and then you just change that and tweak that. You can also have like some feedback going on in between your website. The other tool is this Inspectlet. It actually gives you the entire visual recording of how someone is seeing your website. So if you see in this demo they've given, it's an actual user who's going through the website. And so this is where the recording starts. Somebody just types in their name. And you can see the recording. So you can see, okay, how much time are people spending, what it's the actual visual recording of someone viewing your website. Now, coming to the next point, A/B testing. This is again something that everyone must do when they're working on it, on a product. It's a lot of times it happens when we are discussing, ideating, we have things like, should we go with this or that? And a lot of times we come to a conclusion based on our understanding, or whoever basically has the senior person gets to have a say and it gets passed. Uh, but what you can actually do is with A/B testing, you can throw in different options when to the user. You give both the options to the user, and then based on how they're responding to it, which is more like giving you more results, you go with that. So, for example, let's say let's say you have a heading on a website of where you have to make a transaction. Okay, and now you are questioning yourself whether the offer, there is a discount offer on that particular transaction. Now the debate is whether you should choose red as the offer color or green. Hypothetically, this is where you are stuck and you're not able to decide. Now what you do is, let's say you are sending out that link to 1,000 people. What a lot of tools let you do is, you first do an A/B testing on the first 200 users. So basically, you send red to 100 users and green to another 100. Based on how they respond, whichever color wins, the rest of the 800 people will get that color. So let's say red won in the first controlled pool, the rest of the 800 people will receive red color. So that it's kind of really helpful, and I like use this a lot when I have to kind of work on a product like this. It's really helpful. It just gives you actual results, and you don't have to do any kind of guesswork. And also, you are not risking a lot. Let's say, for example, you chose green color and it went out to 1,000 people, and then you realize, okay, red was the better one. So that you can just avoid that by simply doing an A/B testing. Uh, Last point, feedback from users. It's again a constant exercise that you keep on doing. You keep on showing your product to different people. You, again, what we did in the first step, you observe how they react to it. If they're criticizing your product, don't defend it. Just listen to it and make a note of it. I mean, I've seen people who take feedback and then start defending. No, no, I what I meant to do was this. What do you The user never misunderstands anything. If he or she misunderstood it, it means it's your problem. You've not done it properly. So it's very important to take that feedback positively. Just make a note of it and just listen to whatever they're saying, irrespective of defending or making excuses around it. Uh, all right. As a closing note, design is not a linear process. It's not start to finish. It's always happening. It's always constantly changing. You constantly need to make tweaks, do pivots in your product to kind of keeps making sure that your end user is served. And going back to the first step, it's always about the user. It's always about solving the problem for the user. All right, that's about it. Uh, yeah, questions.
For the wireframes and the high fidelity click-through prototypes,
Right.
uh, some people just skip the wireframes. So um, uh, the low fidelity wireframes, is that a good step or a bad step?
Wireframes are the most important phase of user experience design. It's where you actually put your thoughts into play. The the visual style, what you're calling as high fidelity wire designs, is something that at times a user experience designer is not working on it. It's mostly a UI designer that looks at it. And a lot of time it happens with big design teams that the UI designer is not someone who's well versed with how user behavior actually happens. So it's just they are good with the software mostly and how the things appear visually. But the entire things that we discussed today is usually a job of a UX designer, which kind has to make sure the wireframes are reflecting his thought process. So there is no way you can skip the wireframing. I mean, of course, for smaller projects, we directly make the design and do it. But if we are building a product which has to have a longer shelf life and something which is going to be used by a lot of people, and even for small projects, I mean, I have worked on really small projects, but we've never like it's never advisable to skip wireframing. That's something that actually, if let's say for us as a service company, uh, when we have to go back to the client, we can't show a design in complete stage, because at that point, if we are taking feedback from them, we would have wasted a lot of time in the designing, and then we have to redo a lot of things. So all those things and understandings and user flows and mapping and journeys can be validated right on the wireframe level. The designs come really in the last stage just to make sure our application is visually appealing, but it doesn't answer your user behavior and the empathy aspect of what we discussed.
Okay, okay. Any recommended tools for the empathy mapping and considering the people and their biases to capture and then use them in the process?
So for mapping, that's a very like a manual exercise that you have to do. For personas, there are tools which give you questions and answers. I can share that list with you, where it'll give you set of questions and you can simply answer them. But a lot of things have to be done on a whiteboard where you can just simply answer questions. So it's a very collaborative exercise where the design team actually works closely and they bounce ideas off each other, and then they spend entire day to kind of answer questions. Okay, what is someone saying and what does they actually think? How do customers actually like, because they are polite, they might not be direct about their grievances, but what they actually mean when they say something. So that's something that has to be done collaboratively, and also there's a lot of literature around it that you can like read and understand. So I can share some insights and some links with you that you can just read upon, and like you'll have a better understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any good resources to or courses to learn XD quickly enough to sort of do rapid prototyping?
Yeah, there are. I can also share those links with you. There are a couple of courses I've seen on Udemy that can be done, or there must be something like I'll just check out if it's there's anything for free that we can share with the team.
Cool.
I feel
Yeah.
it's a very easy software, but if you don't want to really like use the tools that are available in XD, what Google and Apple they do now, they provide the resources for their native components. So, for example, if there is a text box, if there is a label, things like that, Apple and Google have provided their extensions for these native extensions in XD. So you can directly drag and drop them, so without having to manually create a text box, label, checkboxes like that. So it really speeds up the process, and then of course you can add colors according to you. So you don't have to use explicitly XD's tools.
Cool. Okay.
Also, for like as Prakhar mentioned, a lot of these things are all the native UI elements are easily available. Even if you were to go with the design pattern, let's say you are working on material design, you can easily find their extensions so that you can simply drag and drop rather than creating something from like scratch. So I feel once someone starts using it, it's a very simple tool that you can get around.
Cool. Okay.
Any other question?
These tools, which are like Hotjar and the other one,
Yeah.
any privacy things we should make aware to the user before we inject it, or
So yeah, so there is yeah, this is an important concern that even I had. So they are compliant to GDPR security protocols. So none of the data that a user inputs is visible to you. For example, passwords, etc., are not visible. Also, you can add filters in your code so that things which, for example, let's say you're filling a form and there are things like email and phone number. So you don't have to kind of like make it visible. Let's say there's a different team who's visualizing the content, and then you don't want that team to kind of, or anyone for that matter, to have personal information shared by the user. So you can easily omit your form fields from capturing that information. So that's something that I also advise, that all the text fields should have that filter. So you can easily do that in the settings, and you can just simply turn that off. Plus, obviously, they don't capture any sensitive information.
okay,
I mean,
awesome.
they've just that's something that quite uh, advertising on their website as well, that they are
So these are
compliant to
for
all these security. Uh,
okay, these are for the website, right?
yeah, I think
Any
you can also
app
do the.
app equivalents?
I'm sure you can add them on apps as well.
Okay.
Yeah. The only change is that all these recordings that we were discussing, where how the mouse is moving, would not be there on an application, because you'll simply tap on it, but you can still get your scroll behaviors, and you can get your which section is getting which is getting tabbed more than the others.
Okay. Some of the customers have their own internal applications and doesn't want to save the data on clouds or the servers which they don't own. So is there any offline kind of a solution for analytics, which is equivalent to Google Analytics or something, which you have come across?
I would have to check for that. Like the ones that I worked on have mostly been online tools.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
Rahul, when you say offline, do you mean the analytics data never leaving the user client side?
No, it's currently Google Analytics data is saved on the Google platforms, right? Their servers. Instead, it will go to our servers.
Okay, okay.
I can surely check and I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Any question? All right then. Thank you for taking out the time.
Thank you.
And if there's anything else that comes up at a later stage, you can always reach out. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.